I think in some ways, we as men have to break that one rule. The one rule of men is very simple. It's don't talk about what it's like to be a man who is struggling. Whether you're struggling in your marriage, whether you're struggling with your health or your weight or your body image or your sexual performance or your finances or your career, just don't fucking talk about it. And that somehow is the solution, which is psychologically, it's stupid. It's actually a very stupid and counterintuitive way of being, because we know that just ignoring things that aren't working is actually vastly more damaging than addressing them.
Before we get into, okay, how do we solve the problem? I would love to hear your take. Why do you think this is such a big problem? Why is this an epidemic amongst men? And why do you think men are hurting so much right now?
I mean, I think it's a bunch of contributing factors. You know, if you went online into the like red pill, black pill forums, you'd probably hear a lot of sort of blaming towards the women's movement and feminism and stuff like that. And I don't necessarily think that that's a huge contributing factor. I think that's a good scapegoat. I think that in some ways, what we're starting to see is a culmination of, one, our institutions aren't actually set up to really support men and the way that we develop. So, for example, there's a gentleman named Richard Reeves who just wrote a book called On Boys and Men. And some of the research that he sort of lays out within the book shows a few things. One, boys develop neurologically slower than girls. And so you have this huge gap that's starting to show up in the education system that we just didn't know about, because women and girls largely weren't in continuing education. They weren't super active in education up until, unfortunately, like 150 years ago. And so now that they've entered into that force, what we're seeing is that, they develop quite a bit faster than young boys. And so I'll give you an example. My son is 22 months old. A couple months ago, we were on a plane, and behind us was, this father with his daughter. And his daughter was just chatting away. She was, I want to watch this. I want to play with that. Yes, Dad. No. Like, oh, look, there's a baby in front of us. And she was referring to my son. And my son doesn't talk yet. And so, here, at the time, I think he was about 20 months old. And I turned around and I said to the other dad, I said, how old's your daughter? And he says, she's 17 months. She is talking at like a second grade level. Like, that's insane. And so, but we know fundamentally that a young boy's prefrontal cortex is going to develop quite a bit slower than young girls. And so, unfortunately, what's happened is that we've actually created an education system where and we didn't know this before, where it's actually very, very beneficial for the progression and the development of young girls, but very detrimental in some ways to the progression and development of young boys. And again, not all young boys, but the majority of them. So I think that there's institutional challenges that we can look at, and that's not necessarily my expertise, to be honest. I think culturally, there are also norms that we've bought into. Like in the book, I talk about the one rule of men, which is the Fight Club reference, right? Which is this notion that there's strength in suppression, that you as a man will somehow gain psychological, physical, and emotional strength by suppressing what you perceive as weakness, what makes you feel insecure. And so the one rule of men is very simple. It's don't talk about what it's like to be a man who is struggling. Whether you're struggling in your marriage, whether you're struggling with your health or your weight or your body image or your sexual performance or your finances or your career, just don't fucking talk about it. And that somehow is the solution, which is like psychologically, it's stupid. It's actually a very stupid and counterintuitive way of being, because we know that just ignoring things that aren't working is actually vastly more damaging than addressing them. So I think in some ways, we as men have to break that one rule. We have to be willing to say and understand and know that there's actually an immense amount of strength in confronting the things that are going wrong, the things that we're struggling with, and that our path towards a deeper kind of strength and sovereignty and contribution and purpose in our life is actually by turning towards the things that we haven't wanted to address. regardless of the area in our life that resides. So I think that those are a couple factors. I think that we as men sometimes can reinforce this notion. And, I think the other thing that I'll say very, very quickly is I think it's become exceedingly easy to be domesticated and to be wildly distracted. I mean, it is just so easy for you as a man to wake up, go on social media, maybe go into work, come back home, play video games, watch porn, go on social media, and go to bed. And to not have any real social interaction, to not pursue your goals, to not pursue the type of body that you want, to not pursue making the type of money that you want or building the type of career that you want. And so I think that a lot of men, when they look out at the hardship that life and culture and society has to offer, because life is hard, and it's challenging. I think that it's very easy to get sort of sucked under by the current of our culture and just sort of acquiesce to all of these distractions. And I'm saying that from a personal experience. I battled porn for a long time and played video games all the time, and drank my face off and smoked weed on weekends, and did all of those things. Like I like to say that I have like a 500-pound lazy fat dude in me that just wants to smoke weed, play video games, and eat unhealthy food. And I think that many of us have that within us. And part of our work is to confront that part. It's to get that part on board so that it's moving with us versus against us. So those are a couple contributing factors. I'm actually curious to get your guys' sense of what you think is contributing to it.